All right, thank you, Gordon, and we're glad to be doing this today. I'll start off by just giving you guys a quick overview of this session. We're headed into a short session. As you all probably already know, Virginia alternates every other year between a long and a short session, 60 days or 45. So this is a 45-day session that will be starting on Wednesday, January 11th, and it should end on February 25th. From time to time, the session will get extended by a couple of days, especially sometimes in a short session just because it's so compressed. You would think that a short session would handle fewer bills than a long session, but unfortunately that's not the case. We have just about the same amount of work every year, close to 2,500 bills, and it's just extremely compressed in a short session. So the bill pre-filing started several weeks ago, back in November, but there's been sort of a slow trickle of bills. Every year it seems it gets slower and slower, and we see fewer bills ahead of session. About 150 have been filed at this point, maybe closer to 200 today, but we still expect, as I said, to see about 2,500 bills in total. So most of them will be filed when we come back from the holidays, and even up until the end of the first week of session. So as you can imagine, it's difficult for folks on our side, but also for the legislators to review all the bills, especially when they're filed so late or even during the session. But that's unfortunately the reality we live in now. We are expecting several major issues this session. As you know, since the McDonnell administration, there have been a series of ethic reform bills every year. There's already been, I think, close to 25 proposals for ethics reforms from our ethics council that was created after the McDonnell trial. We're going to see several bills on election voter fraud issues and on restoration of rights, which was a big issue this past fall and summer with the governor's restoration of the rights of several thousand felons. We'll continue to have bills introduced on what we've termed new economy versus old. This is, examples include Tesla versus the automobile dealers, Airbnb versus conventional tourism hotels, and TNCs, which are transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, versus cabs and limousines. Those continue to be very contentious issues, and we expect legislation on at least two of those three listed there. We'll have legislation on economic development. There was a very bad report released a few weeks ago about our Virginia Economic Development Partnership and how mismanaged it's been over the last few years. The governor has already sent down his recommendations for how that agency should be restructured, but the legislature has promised to introduce their own versions of that as well. They want more oversight, and of course the governor has given himself more oversight over that agency. So that will be interesting. We will continue to see education and workforce development reforms, but probably the largest issue this session will be the budget. The governor on Friday, and we'll talk about this more in a couple slides, but the governor introduced his budget proposals to the two-year biennial budget. We're facing a very severe $1.5 billion shortfall in our revenues. It looks like it's slowly getting better, but as of right now, we're not going to be seeing much, if any, new funding. So the bulk of the legislative session will be centered around budget cuts, and that's already well underway now. And then the last bullet on this slide, brochure bills. 2018, as you all know, Virginia is offset from most of the rest of the country in its elections. So in 2018, we will have an election for the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, as well as all 100 members of the House of Delegates. So we will see a lot of bills this year that we call brochure bills, which are bills that get the voter base fired up and that obviously you can write about on mailers or in radio spots, that sort of thing. We've already seen a couple of those come down on abortions, guns, and restoration of rights. So we will probably see many more. And those are the items they like to deal with in these years right before an election. So you tend to not have some of the more mundane bills that you would see in an off-election year.
sometimes those brochure bills are designed more for the brochure and the content of the political environment than they are for the content of the bill. It's to send a message, as Katie said.
Right. So as I mentioned, we are in the first fiscal year of our biennial budget. That you see the date range there for our budget cycle. The governor last Friday introduced his budget amendments to last year's approved budget. That will be the last time that he gets to amend the budget until after the General Assembly adjourns in February. So from now until then, the legislature will introduce their own budget amendments and will approve their revised budget document, which will then go back to the governor, and he will have until the reconvene session, which is in March, to make changes, and then they'll come to a final resolution at that point. I did just add this one bullet in blue to let you know that we usually don't see issues that are of particular import to AGC in the budget document. They're usually through the normal legislative process. But occasionally you will see the governor and legislators trying to legislate through the budget. And there was one sentence change in the budget this year that we have found where the governor has proposed to allow cooperative procurement to be used for energy efficiency projects. So that's going to be an administration goal to get that language included. I think that will probably be fairly controversial. I do think at this point that's all we've seen in the budget that impacts you all directly, but I did want to make you aware of it. As I said, throughout the session, legislators can introduce their own budget amendments, and that can be striking out amendments that the governor has made. So for instance, there may be legislators opposed to this language about energy efficiency, and folks trying to strike it out through the legislative process. But once the budget is passed by the General Assembly, it goes back to the governor for his additional amendments and vetoes and his signature, and then it goes back to the General Assembly for their approval during the reconvened session.
Let me supplement that with one comment. Obviously, with a very strong pro-Democrat governor and a Senate and House that are majority party is the Republicans, and the differences in perspectives has definitely influenced the budget deliberations in the past. It actually will again affect that. But the governor this year did not put into the budget adoption of the Affordable Care Act, so that issue will not be as much in play. That had been a real divisive factor in the past, and the ill will exists, but usually in the budget deliberations, they're working for the same purpose. Virginia has a history of having a very solid budget, and Virginia now has the problem of deficiency, and it has to be addressed because we must have a balanced budget. So I think the budget will be less contentious than in the past, but it still will have a difference of perspectives.
Katie and Bill, I appreciate that. It's Gordon real quick, and I'm going to kind of change our protocol real quick because we just had a question that came in and it was asking about what's the definition of an energy efficiency project, and if you could explain what you're aware at this point of what that may be, that would be helpful.
Sure. We looked into this a little bit. It's defined in the code, and I don't have the specific language in front of me, but it is fairly narrow. It's not any project that has an energy efficiency side effect. I can't remember the specific language, but it's fairly narrowly drawn. But of course, the difficulty is our position in the past is not to make any other exceptions for cooperative procurement. And so, you know, every time you introduce one of these, it may look narrow to begin with, but it becomes a Christmas tree where everybody wants to get their own exception thrown in. So that's, of course, you know, where we would want to watch out and watch it closely to make sure that didn't happen.
I had been approached by the advocates for this, Johnson Controls, about representing them, and I thought it was just, you know, putting in some new energy equipment, but it involves construction, and consistent with the AGC policy of not advocating expanding cooperative procurement, we declined the representation. So we're familiar with the issue there.
Helpful. Appreciate that. Thanks.
This I mentioned already. This summer it was announced we had a $1.5 billion shortfall for the biennium. That shortfall, the way this usually works, agencies are asked to make different levels of cuts. So this year they were asked to propose 5 and 7.5% cuts to their current budget. What ended up happening on Friday, and this was a surprise to some, the governor went with the 7.5% cut for all agencies except for higher education, and for those institutions he just instituted the 5% cut. So that's where we are right now. That of course can be changed by the legislature. In addition to the agency cuts, the shortfall will be addressed by a withdrawal from our rainy day fund, and there was talk about eliminating the state employee pay increase. As it turned out, it's going to be just a 1-year bonus instead of a pay increase, instead of a raise. The amendments that the governor made do require cuts to education, as I said, a 5% cut, and cuts to health care. We are getting indications that the numbers for December and January are going to be slightly better than we had thought this summer. So the message has been we might not have to cut as much. It does not mean that we're going to have money to spend, but there is some hope that between when the governor put forth his proposals on Friday and by the time the legislature has to make their final decision at the end of February, we may have a little bit more money to work with than it looks like right now.
We've got a series of topics here we're going to cover with you going back and forth. The first one is Class D registration. This is a bill that comes from the home builders of Virginia. The issue is, as you know, everybody has to be, contractors have to be licensed by the Board of Contractors, Class A, Class B, Class C. It is a licensure process. It has certain dollar amounts tied to it. There's been a problem from the home builders' perspective where they would have people on the job site who were doing small cleanup jobs or small defined jobs of less than $1,000. The examples they use are putting up the mailboxes after the homes have been, cleaning up things and so forth. So they are proposing a Class D level of registration as opposed to lobbying, as opposed to licensure of less than $1,000. And so you must register, but there are no qualifications, no exams, no experience. Unlike Class A, B, and C, you have to show your qualifications, have an exam, and have experience. These would just simply be registration. We met with them. There's some question what the Department of Public Professional Occupation and Regulation will think about it. They've not talked to them yet, but it's unlikely, I believe, and can be corrected, that we have many people on our job sites that are, in that Class D range. So that time will tell how that one goes. The next one is the fines, and Katie's will share that with you.
Yeah, the next one, you all may have heard of this, but Virginia's Department of Labor has been mandated by Congress, which has already increased fines. And you can see the levels here, but this is the first time that OSHA has increased their fines in 25 years, and the fines will go to the Treasury, not to OSHA itself. So the maximum Virginia fines will go from $70,000 to $120,000 for willful and repeated violations, and for serious violations from $7,000 to $12,600. This is something that Virginia has to do. It's it's coming from the federal government, but there will have to be a bill here in Virginia to have it done. I think there was some talk among the legislative committee, and Gordon, you can tell me if I'm wrong, that we may kind of watch this one closely, see what happens when Dolly comes in with the bill. I think there's some folks who think maybe these fines will be changed at the federal level under the Trump administration, but it's a little too early to tell. And I'll just say as a note, unfortunately, that situation is something we're seeing play out over and over here because our session meets so early. Trump will not be sworn in until partway through our session. And our session is so short that we really can't respond quickly to changes that he makes on the federal level. So there has been some talk that Virginia might have a special session this year to kind of start dealing with some of the changes that Trump makes at the federal level. This may be one of those issues that gets punted to a special session for that reason. We are one of the first states to have our session, every year. The states vary, but we have one of the earliest and quickest sessions. So this puts us in a unique position in regards to Trump and what he will do at the federal level.
Katie, this is Gordon. That's a great point, and I appreciate you bringing that up. We have talked with AGC America, obviously, that deals with this on a lot of the federal level. There's an issue that's called the Congressional Review Act that allows an incoming president to review all past regulations over the previous month. I understand that they can go back to Congress and ask them to revote or revoke those regulations. And I know AGC America is watching a number of regulations that are being impacted on this. This one will be interesting to see because it's really more of a congressional budget issue as opposed to an executive order by the president. So President-elect Trump may not have any ability to do anything on this. He may try and leverage some influence on it, but we'll have to wait and see what happens on that. It's a good point. Thanks.
Thank you.
Let me kind of tee up here real quick. As you all know, the board of directors for the Associated General Contractors has been discussing the procurement issues for quite some time. And our policy is still the same, that we consider competitive bid is our preferred method going forward. But we aren't taking necessarily specific positions on the procurement discussion that's going forward. We were talking with Bill and Katie and whether or not we were including discussions on procurement, and we do know that there is going to be some activity on this. And there was a hearing on procurement just last week that both Katie and Bill and I attended. So we just wanted to provide you all some background information so that you all are aware as to what's going on with the discussions with procurement. We are heavily involved on all the sides on this, not just the two specific groups that are involved in this, but also with the Department of General Services, the community college services, VACO, local government. Everyone else has a little piece of the whole procurement message. And so we're heavily involved in those discussions and just monitoring that as it's coming out. So with that, I'm going to let Bill and Katie kind of tee off where we are at this point.
Procurement issues of something I dealt with when I was in the General Assembly from 74 to 90. Was vice chairman of the procurement subcommittee. We had about a 2-year study, and it's something we've dealt with ever since because of changes in the business patterns and changes in perceptions as to what works and doesn't work. As Gordon said, competitive seal bid on the design bid build program is the preferred method in the procurement law. It is true, however, that design build and other matters are in fact also permitted. So some of the higher educations, the bigger colleges, if you will, are exempt from using the competitive seal bids. The theory is that they are sizable, they have professional staff, and they can best handle their procurement, so forth. And that has created some concerns. We are aware there's going to be one piece of legislation, this was referenced in the December 15th meeting, that would say for any method of any projects over $40 million, anything below that amount must be competitive seal bid unless a special circumstances is shown and approved by the Department of General Services. anything over the method for projects above 20 million could be for just basically what is chosen as the project. But it's trying to draw a line. Competitive seal bidding below is the norm, above it could be anything. And we did hear discussions there from the Department of General Services, which is an agency that's designed to help oversee these. In 2015, legislation was put in that required a 2-year study of this, with them reporting back to the General Assembly in July of 2017. As has become the pattern, every year there's a procurement bill, bills from someone. So that was the pattern set in 2015 to report in 2017. Then in the 2016 session, they added in some additional requirements that the General Assembly did dealing with higher education. And so this is an issue that's really very much in flux, if you will. There are strong differences of opinions among contractors on all stages of the spectrum of business. Sometimes they're referred to as the smaller businesses and the larger contractors, the smaller contractors, larger contractors. None of them are small, but smaller is opposed to reference in that respect. The Department of General Services came in and they said we really need to extend this study by 1 year because you told us to do it by July 17, and yet you put more things on us. And so they think that there should be a study and should enact some uniform legislative procedures for design, bill, and other methods of procurement. The legislative committee that was from before did not bite at that, and so I think we're back now to where we are. On slide 10, there is, we know, the smaller contractors, which work as the Virginia Procurement Alliance, have indicated that they're going to propose that any method for projects over 40 million can be any type of procurement method that's permitted by the law, but anything below must be, all projects below the 40 million must be competitive seal bid unless a special circumstances shown. The difference in perspective, as explained by the Department of General Services, is whether you want, is the project best suited to be designed, to be designed, bid, and then build, or which is the competitive seal bidding, or is it best to go ahead and get the contractor and the architect, the engineer, the client, if you will, all involved at the onset and do it through another procurement method? Time will tell where this will come out during the session, and we are mindful of the fact that this is an issue of very importance to the membership of AGC, but it's also an issue that is widely diverse in its opinion among AGC members. So we will obviously be keeping you posted on this as it goes out. The smaller group has proposed their proposal that's referred to on the screen as one proposed legislation. The larger ones have not yet shown what they will have, but we do know that they will have a proposal in that respect. Well, Katie, why don't you take over the next one then? Sure.
So also at the same meeting that Bill was referencing, there was supposed to be discussion of small versus micro business. You guys might remember this issue has been percolating since Governor McAuliffe issued an executive order several years ago now that created the new micro business classification. It's caused a lot of headache across the state for many reasons. One, the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity, which was overwhelmed before this change, is now even more underwater. They just are having a very hard time processing all of the certifications that have come in, and they're not always being consistent about who they classify as small versus micro. So there has been an attempt over the last several years to clarify these definitions. Steve Vermillion and I were part of a year-long panel before last session that came up with a very detailed proposal about how these definitions should work at the state level. Unfortunately, the legislation, although it almost passed, it was killed at the last minute by the Senate. So we are expecting there may be more legislation on that topic this year. In addition, I have heard from the director of that department that she may be issuing some administrative changes that don't require legislation to help speed along the process. We were expecting to hear a lot more about this at that meeting on the 15th, but the director had a family emergency of some sort and wasn't there to present. And as a result, the legislators basically skipped that part of the presentation with just a little bit of review. So we're still kind of up in the air on it. I've been in touch with the director almost weekly about what's going on, and I expect that we'll see some sort of proposal to again revise the definition. The AGC membership last year was able to support the proposal that the panel had made that Steve Vermillion and I were on, but there was still some opposition, particularly from some minority groups, including the Hispanic Caucus and others who really like the micro definition, and frankly, it benefits them. So it will continue to be controversial. The problem is, even if we have a bill this year that passes, it likely wouldn't go into effect until July. And just depending on our governor election in the fall, because this was all done through an executive order, it could all go out the window anyway in the fall when a new governor is elected. So there's just a lot of uncertainty right now around this topic, but we'll be watching it closely, and we'll keep you all posted if a bill is introduced on it.
Before we go to the next subject, let me tell you the process we use. As bills are filed, we review each of them and then highlight for Gordon and the committee which issues that we think would be of impact to AGC members. So we read all 2,500 of those bills, and then we sort of narrow it down to the ones that AGC members would be affected by that legislation. The next topic we want to bring up to you on the storm scammer legislation is just one illustration. This is not it's a nice, very good bill, but it's just an illustration of one of those many bills we'll be highlighting for you. So Katie will take care of that.
Yeah, so this is a bill that's already been introduced that we actually have been working on for another client in the Mutual Insurance Companies of Virginia. But it's one that AGC would likely support, and other groups have been very supportive of. You can see here on the screen, after we have catastrophes, major storms, a lot of times unlicensed contractors will cross over state lines and prey particularly on vulnerable citizens such as elderly folks. They'll often offer to rebate your insurance in order to get a quick deal on usually roofing work. These people are known as storm scammers, and this has happened across the country. And so I think close to 13 states in this past year have passed very similar legislation to this. Ours would prohibit rebating in these situations and allow a consumer to rescind a contract when they learn that coverage isn't available. Our law here in Virginia was already pretty strong about prohibiting unlicensed contractors from crossing state lines. So we were able to make our bill pretty tailored. But this, as Bill said, is an example of something that we just want to make you aware of. It probably has little effect on most members, but it's something good we can support. Frankly, this is probably one of those brochure bills that we mentioned. This is a good one that won't have opposition, because you won't see the unlicensed contractors from other states coming in to stand up and testify against the bill. And it should pass fairly easily, but this is one we wanted to make you all aware of.
The next topic is one that the AGC has been involved in from the start. as you know, Virginia has benefited from historic the rehabilitation tax credits. It has allowed localities to basically working with appropriate contractors to rehabilitate property to make it in a fashion where it's much more usable, and especially in the more urban areas of older buildings that have historic nature, use of this as a credit has been very beneficial. A study was started earlier this year that would limit the amount. The question is, what type of limit should be placed on historic rehabilitation tax credit? Gordon has been attending those meetings, as Katie has too. This has benefited the private sector. It's benefited the public sector because a number of these buildings are public buildings. But legislation is being considered that would limit the amount of the tax credit for probably a couple of reasons. One, it's costly for the state. It takes away revenues from the state. And some of these projects, many of these projects take place in the more urban areas and not around the state. So that's an issue that we'll be working with, and AGC is part of a coalition that's been working to preserve that issue. We added on at the very bottom of this an unrelated topic, unrelated as far as topic, but same type of subject matter. Legislation is going to be put in that will cap the land conservation credits. As you know, if you put your land and certain qualifications, you get a land conservation credit. And there will be a measure to try to cap that, if you will, again, because of the financial consequences for the Commonwealth. The patron of the bill is the fellow who's been very, very, very supportive of land conservation credits, but in recognition of where the state is now from a financial standpoint, has asked that be considered. And so we've got a number of the next issues that AGC and the districts are going to be looking towards in the next session. These are legal matters that Herschel and Spencer have brought to us, that with this being so late as opposed to this session, we all recognize this is got to be involved in. It will take a detailed. This is not an issue that you can summarize for the legislature in a 10-minute conversation, and so they're going to be helping us in that respect. So that we'll be working on that for the 2018 session, 2017 session, 2018 session.
2018. Great. Guys, thank you very much for that. That was very helpful. We do have a few questions lined up, so I'm going to go ahead and start reading some of these off and see if you guys don't mind answering these for me. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the definition of a micro business versus a small business?
Sure. I don't know specifically. I'm sorry, the thresholds off the top of my head. I think where small is 250 or fewer employees. I believe micro is 50 or fewer. And I can't recall the revenue threshold cap. It's an either or in Virginia, either the employee number or the revenue.
I think the revenue is 3 million, and you up to 3 million, and it's a 3-year look back.
Right.
So
and
that's
small is 10 million.
Okay.
So that's the difference. The problem is the way the governor wrote the executive order. Very few folks can qualify for that micro designation, and they're getting a lot of preference. And so what's happening a lot of times is they will win a bid, but then they have to turn around and get help from a small business because they're really not able to fulfill the scope of the work. So it's ending up costing the state more money than saving it. And the only one who really benefits are those micro businesses who are winning all the contracts now. So it's just kind of, I think probably the consensus among the legislature, I think, is that the more appropriate thing to have done rather than introduce this new category of micro, would have been to hone down the definition of small, because the small business definition is pretty broad, and most businesses qualify as small. So I think the more appropriate thing to have done would have been to ratchet that down a little bit rather than create this new category and have kind of a bifurcated system.
Katie, that's a great question. Do we anticipate, I know before there were some definitions about a small business in Virginia. Do we anticipate that legislation coming back in 2017?
Yeah, so last year, the proposal that went forward for the most part, conformed Virginia's definition to the federal definition. And Steve did an analysis and found that most AGC members would not be affected by that change. So we were supportive of it. That bill was introduced by a Democratic House patron, and it did pass the House, and it almost passed the Senate, which is unusual because he's in the minority party in both chambers. So I think depending on who was to introduce a bill like that, if a Republican introduced that same bill, I think it would have a very decent shot at getting passed this year. And I know we had heard that Frank Ruff was interested in it, and certainly if he carried that same bill, I think he would be able to get it passed. But as of yet, we haven't seen anything posted.
Good. And then can you repeat the federal definition of small business at this point?
So it's not something I can repeat off the top of my head because it's much more complicated than our system. So ours is a straight across 250 employees or fewer, or under 10 million in revenue, with the 3-year look back you talked about. The federal definition is broken down into something like 500 categories. So even for contractors, there were dozens of categories that different contractor companies could fall into, and each category has its own definition. And the point of the federal scheme is that, all businesses shouldn't be treated the same. For instance, a contracting company may have many more employees and still be considered small for contracting than a different type of industry. So I can't tell you off the top of my head, but they are available on the federal SBA website, and you can look up. There's just a spreadsheet showing every single category and what the definition for each category was. But as I said, Steve did analyze it and tried to look at those dozen or so categories that contractors would fall into, and in most cases, folks who qualify as small in Virginia would still qualify under the federal definition.
Great.
That is not always true in other industries, but it would be true in ours.
Thanks. Next question is regarding the historic rehabilitative tax credits. The question is, if they are capped, do you know how they will be allocated at that point? Will it be first come, first serve, by geographic location, by size?
I don't think we know yet. I just don't know the answer, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think they've thrown out a lot of suggestions along those lines, but we have not seen any proposal yet.
Okay. All right. Very good. The next question is regarding back to the Economic Development Authority situation. It said if the legislature has its way, who would control the Economic Development Authority going forward?
Yeah, so we haven't seen the legislature's proposal yet. What happened was, after the report came out, the governor released his proposal, which would include having the Secretary of Commerce and Trade be the leadership of VEDP. And so, of course, because that person is appointed by the governor would have a lot of direct control over that agency. The big criticism has been that there is no real leadership beside the board of VEDP, which is a volunteer board that meets quarterly. They don't have a lot of day-to-day oversight. And all we've heard thus far is that the legislature kind of scoffed at the governor's proposal and said, no, we would not want to give that much authority to the governor to control this agency. We'd want to work in some controls so that the legislature also had some oversight. But we haven't seen the specifics of that yet.
Okay.
Let me weigh in only to share with you the study that was done by the Joint Legislative Review and Audit Commission, which is a very, very, very professional staff. It's created by the General Assembly, and the report that they gave of the performance of Virginia Economic Development Partnership was one of the most scathing I've ever seen. from private conversations, I can tell you that that department, which is very, very, very vital, trying to help localities, areas, and the state bring in new business, was just not well run. One person told me that they were prohibited from talking to legislators. This is a body created to serve the Commonwealth, and they were prohibited from talking to the legislators. The new Secretary of Commerce has changed that, but this is a topic that's going to receive a lot of attention from the General Assembly members, and quite frankly, it should. It's one of the most important things because, as you know, Virginia has always had a great economy. We've benefited from the presence of military in the Commonwealth, and so much of our area of Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads is dependent on that. And there's been sequestration and other problems, and then a general abatement in the robust economy. And so this is a priority for the members to get that straight.
Good deal. Thank you. Our next question, and we have two questions at this point. And so the next one is, are there any discussions addressing contractor licensing and how it pertains to temporary labor providers? Have you heard anything on this?
We've not, I've not heard any discussion, and we've not seen anything in the legislation yet.
Although, you know, the one we discussed about the Class D, I mean, it kind of goes to that issue, which is the home builders say, at least a lot of times, these folks who put in the mailboxes or do the cleanup work, they're not properly licensed, and they're just working under the supervision of the contractor above them, and then that contractor and all the ones above him are liable for that person's work. And that's kind of been, you know, a topic of much discussion over the last few years. Are those independent contractors? Are they employees? And who should have liability? Their proposal doesn't quite answer that broader question, but it gets to some of those same points.
Their legislation does have the benefit of saying that the contractor, whether it be A, B, or C in license, who involves a Class D contractor, is solely responsible for the actions of that person. And so they're trying to say that if you're the general and you're a sub or sub-sub, you're not responsible. You're only responsible for the actions of the person who contracted for you to be on the job. And that is an overall benefit.
One other thing I'll add, it's funny how all these issues kind of, you know, overlap each other, but that's been another problem that we've seen at the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity. And one of the reasons that they've been so overwhelmed is they've taken an approach that temporary employees should be counted towards your employee number for the small definition, and that was not the way it used to be done. And I believe, although I haven't seen it yet, that will be one of the administrative changes that I mentioned earlier, that the director's thinking about changing back to the old system. But as of yet, we haven't seen it.
Okay, great. Last question I have here is, every year there seems to be some discussion about a minimum wage increase. What's the likelihood of something like this taking efforts, as you're seeing a more concerted effort on this issue across the country?
There's no chance.
Yeah, they will. Many bills will be introduced, and none of them will pass.
Understood. Thank you very much. Folks, that's all the questions that I have from you all. Bill and Katie, thank you all very much for your input on this. We greatly appreciate this. Two shameless plugs real quick. For those of you who are on the webinar real quick, Williams Mullen is going to be having there is actually another question, but I'll bring it up here in just a minute. It's going to be having a legislative reception the AGC is a sponsor of, and I have a limited number of seats left if you all want to go to that. It's going to be a bluegrass brews and barbecue on January 18 from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at their downtown law firm. You cannot wear a coat and tie. Is that correct, Bill?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's a casual, fun environment. So if you want to meet with some legislators and talk with them, it's a great opportunity to do that. That's right before our legislative our convention at the Homestead. Attendance is very high. Our block of rooms is sold out for Saturday night. So if you're looking for a block of room or a room on Saturday night, you need to let me know, and I see if I can't get you a discounted rate on that. Both Katie and Bill are planning on coming to our our conference, and we'll provide an update during session as well. It's a key component to let you all know what's going on in the General Assembly as much as possible, and we look forward to that. No, it was just a thank you note for everyone for participating. So we are all good. You all, if you all have other questions, feel free to shoot Bill or Katie or myself questions. Feedback is always a gift. This is going to be recorded. This has been recorded, so we'll post it on our website as well, so other folks for members can see this as well. If that's all we've got today, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, and look forward to seeing you guys in the new year. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, thanks so much.
Oh,
You're
thank
welcome.
you.
Have a good one. We'll see you.
Yeah, bye.